Hello, folks. Thanks so much for being patient. I was trying to learn how to use a multi-streaming service. I got it to work earlier. I didn't get it to work just now. I like the idea that the community shouldn't be kind of beholden to one platform. You should be able to see it on a range of places. So if we piss someone off, it doesn't matter. So today we're going to hear from Scott Swain. Did I pronounce your last name correctly, Scott? You're going to be muted. Let me,
Yeah, you did.
good. Scott is the developer of an empathy-oriented chatbot with the wonderful name empathybot.net. And he, I believe, is going to start out making sure we understand what it can do and um and what it's good for. And then we will, after that, get into more of the technical decisions and stuff. So actually, I guess maybe we ought to take a moment to ask people what their technology backgrounds are. Do you want to ask that question or should I, Scott? Okay. Um, People who think of themselves as, pretty nerdy, programmery type people, could they raise their hands using the reactions raise hand button? And if Kent Pittman doesn't raise his hand, I'm going to be really annoyed. Um, I've I've written lots of programs in languages designed by Kent Pittman. So again, okay. Uh, so we have at least a couple of people who are not quite so nerdy. Yeah. So Scott, um, you're on. It sounds like we have a somewhat mixed, oh, not very mixed audience. Oh yeah, somewhat mixed audience. Um, okay. Anything else I can do to support you?
Yeah, I think I'm good for now, but feel free to interrupt. Um, so I am curious, you mentioned Kent, and this way you mentioned him was that he has created a computer language or one or more computer
Yeah,
language.
he did many things. Kent, do you want to say hi? Kent, I guess one
I'm
thing
not
he's famous for
not
is having
contributed
written
languages.
the missing Mac Lisp manual, which became known as the Pitt Manual, but he also helped in the definition of the dominant Lisp called Common Lisp. Those are things you're known for, right, Kent?
Yeah, but mostly because I'm a heavy technical contributor to some of those things and a writer, but they are not mine. Most of them were committee projects. Um, but yeah, I've done lots of tech stuff and lots of stuff related to language design.
Cool.
Was a key person at the MIT AI lab for many years.
Impressive. Envy. Okay, so probably one way to begin this would be to share my screen and share a look at Empathy Bot, which you all are welcome to go visit. There's no sign in required. Okay, a way to begin. I'd like to begin by showing y'all Empathy Bot, and I put a link in the chat so y'all can talk to her yourselves in a private conversation. There's no sign in, so your information is stored in a data. I mean, you're not information, but your conversations are stored in a database, but they're anonymized, so your name isn't part of it. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen so you can take a look at her from if you're, and we can play with her together. Okay. So with EmpathyBot in the beginning, the idea, I'd been studying and teaching nonviolent communication, and then I sort of created my own version, just because I wanted something more what I call street empathy. I found nonviolent communication to be useful, but also somewhat clinical if you do it the way the book teaches. And it was a brilliant book. I recommend it. Changed my life, blah, blah, blah. So I created a version. I wrote a book called A Practical Empath, Rewire Your Mind. And I believe that's in the meetup description, and you can ask about it later. I'll put it in chat if you need it. It's on Amazon. But anyway, so I decided I wanted to create a conversational, sort of like a therapist slash personal coach. And at first I called it Empathy Bot, and blah, blah, blah. It evolved. I'll get into the technical evolution of it after a moment. I'll start out by just showing what she can do. So in the beginning here, this front page, this is really just to keep the spam out, keep the bots out, actually. So if you're here for prizes or bacon, you're not going to get her services. But if you click empathy, then it brings you to this page where then I've got some buttons here if you're like, I don't know what to say. And it's funny because I review conversations that people have with her that, again, they don't reveal people's names or anything, but and I don't do it every day. It would take too much time. But I found that sometimes people go in here and they're like, they'll say to her, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to ask you. So these buttons help people have a bit of a clue, at least, if they're not sure what they want. So I'm going to just push one of the buttons. Improve my love life. Who cannot use more of that? So then it types in there a question that I could send her. And she does her little thinking. And are you feeling something might be missing in your current relationship? So oh, and by the way, this is if you're for the NVC people out there that came to this meeting because they're into NVC, this isn't going to be perfect NVC, because if it was perfect, we don't feel like that's not correct. But whatever. Okay, so I've actually tried to make her a bit less clinical, a bit more conversational, to sound like a real human might sound. She even does humor if you push her toward that direction. But anyway, I'm going to pause there because I've said a lot, and I'd like to see if anybody has questions.
I do actually. What are you starting from? Are you building on a large language model? Like how much of the language is there? Are you just guiding the dialogue part, and sort of if you just sort of in gross pieces sort of say what part you're contributing and what part you're building
on? Yeah. Okay. Great question. And so now we're going to lapse into, or
Wait, hold on. Maybe we should spend a little time playing with the thing, seeing what it's good for before we turn off all the non-nerds.
Okay. Right on.
Let's
Okay. So I'm
let's
going to
stay
answer.
general for a little bit. And could you ask the question again in like 10, 15 minutes, please?
Sure.
Cool.
Thanks.
So I'll answer her. Am I feeling like something might be missing? My current, yeah, none of the chicks. Please, I hope nobody chooses to be offended by the terminology I'm going to use here. I date, have flukes or a blowhole. Who can guess what sea creature I'm talking about? Okay. Hopefully the things I did today didn't break it.
Oh, I just discovered that Zoom has I'm sorry. Yeah, that Zoom has a wonderful Zoom feature. That was hard to say. But yeah, I just got to zoom in this Zoom meeting, and that made it easy, much easier for me to see what Scott's doing.
Great. I'm just popping over to the server real fast to see what error messages came up. Okay. Just gonna restart, see if that fixes things. Okay, are you feeling uncertain or unhappy with your relationships right now? Does love mean companionship and mutual understanding to you? Or do these words not precisely describe what you're seeking? Well, that works. I think I'm having issues because of the non-humans wanting to date. So you're trying to connect romantically with non-humans? Does that idea of exploring new types of relationships excite you? Or maybe you're curious about what you might find. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, you guys got the link in the chat if you want to talk to her. I'm not really, not really sure. Let's see if I could activate her humor. I'm constantly changing parameters on how she works in terms of her creativity and system message, if you all know what that is.
Actually, I can jump in with some less nerdy questions.
Cool.
Okay, so what do you think of her as being good at? What do you think of her? First of all of these buttons like empathy game, feels and needs, I guess those are real buttons, but improve my love life. There was only the bacon that was fake. That was just to get um uh bots to go away. Yeah, so what are you proud of? What are you wanting to see more of? Like, can you talk about your thoughts about it?
Yeah, okay. I
In
mean,
terms of the pure, I mean, I'm not talking about like random features like, email me a copy of my conversation. I'm talking about of the core chatbot functionality. What are you really pleased with? What are you not so happy with? Talk about that.
yeah, actually, I've progressed to calling it she more because of its fake intelligence, whatever you want to call that, its ability to reason. The initial goal was to provide people with a free and easy way to get empathy and or even advice if they push her for advice. I've instructed her to not give advice or reassurance unless pushed. And that comes from my NVC training, where true empathy is not fixing people's problems. It's more of an invitation to people to fix their own issues, or even just to recognize first off the emotions, and then underneath those emotions, what's influencing, what motives or values or needs are influencing those emotions. So that's what her initial training was. And she just gets smarter and smarter. And a tiny lapse into nerdland is that, yes, she uses OpenAI's API, and I'll get into more detail about that later. But she's also trained on a condensed version of my book, and lots and lots. And trained isn't a technically accurate term, but for the non-nerds, it is. So basically, she uses a compressed rule set that I've given her. By compressed, it's like she has a limited memory, let's say, and I want a large portion of that memory to be free for conversations, so she doesn't have to so she doesn't forget the beginning of the conversation. Let's say, so if you want to have basically I've instructed her to have 9 back and forths before she starts forgetting the beginning of the conversation. So that way the conversation can evolve and she could keep up a rational understanding of what's going on. So any other questions? Anything you
We
want
have
me
a
to
question in the
correct?
chat. Um, how do you feel about getting empathy from her versus humans
Oh,
personally?
great. Yeah, great question. So in empathy, in psych terms for empathy, like in the DSM, um, like people that are trained psychologists and psychiatrists have 2 different forms of empathy that they learn about. They don't necessarily learn them, but and one is called cognitive empathy, where the other is affective empathy, which we might call emotional empathy. So after doing 19 years of training and teaching people and having work groups and whatnot, I've come to the conclusion so far, the idea that most people think of the term empathy to mean the emotional side, like, oh, I can feel what you're feeling kind of thing. Um, and I'm gonna try to like get into your mode or mood, where cognitive empathy is more about understanding on a more cognitive level what another person is feeling, what they're going through. So the whole putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, but just not literally feeling their pain unless you choose to, if that's even possible, right? So we have mirror neurons, blah blah, but we don't have to sidetrack into that unless somebody asks. So the point I'm making here is that that system that I learned and that I trained her on is cognitive empathy. Okay. So I do use her sometimes when people ask me a question that is convoluted or really difficult for me to understand what the hell they're asking me, especially because maybe they didn't use punctuation or maybe they whatever, but it was just not easy for me to figure out what they're even asking or what they're even saying to me. I will type it in or paste it into here and she will condense. It's one of the features I put in her is like, because I realized upon reviewing conversations that sometimes people would, just like they say to any of us, they will use far more words than they really need to because they have a need for understanding that they want to get met or clarity or something, right? And they just don't realize they're muddying the waters maybe by using so many words. But I'll paste that into here and see what she says. And sometimes that'll inform my reply to them, or at least it'll inform my understanding. And I'm like, oh, because that's where in any GPT, um, from 4 onward, that's OpenAI's offerings, but even some other ones like Anthropic's Claude 3 is equivalent. And there's some others, but anyway, any of those, you could do the same thing. You could just paste in there, hey, what the hell is this person trying to tell me? And it will clarify for you. Um, Maybe you have to tell it not to be verbose. That's a thing sometimes. But she's automatically, I've designed her to reduce words to the lowest common denominator while still maintaining, hopefully, as much meaning as possible. So I'm going to pause there. I'm not looking at chat, so I do appreciate, Eric, that you were letting me. And if you're okay
Yeah,
with me.
I'll do that. Um,
Oh, I do see
um,
chat. I got that in a separate window now. Yay.
I think actually it'd be fun for people to take the next 5 minutes and for people to screw around with her um, while the author is here to answer questions. What do you think about that, Scott?
Yeah, I'll pause. I do want to answer MK's question. Well, first, Justin, um,
That's a tech question. You can,
Tech question. Okay, I'll put that off for now.
you can hold on to that for a few minutes.
No, this is not my empathy buddy of choice, because my empathy buddy of choice would be a real human in person. And so I'm not more pleased with her than people. I'm not that much of a nerd, but thanks, MK. There's pretend being offended. Okay. Wing Wong, having GPT handle summarization. How much does the underlying GPT provider's model skew or color the resulting summary condensation? Not much, not as much as you might suspect, but I do give it some instruction for the summarization. I've separated that into a different agent, like really just a different function that gives a different system message. So just like, hey, here's what your purpose is. It's to condense, summarize this, but I want you to make sure you're doing this and that, blah, blah. So now I will just pause and listen and look at chat, and for if any of y'all are playing with it.
Yeah, so do people feel like this? I'm messing around with it myself now that I know that I'm not supposed to click on bake-in and prizes, and which I think may have been the main thing that threw me off. But yeah, it would be great if people got a little bit of experience with it and told, maybe gave Scott some examples of answers they thought were particularly supportive and ones that didn't seem so good.
Well, prompt-based guardrails. I'm curious, Wing Wong, what you mean by that. Do you mean those three buttons? Because those are not guardrails. They're more like, hey, here's ideas you can use, but ask me anything. Maybe I'm misinterpreting your question. I only added just yesterday, I added the summarization feature, and I thought,
Hey,
oh yeah.
Bing, Scott just asked you a question. Do you mind unmuting? I think you can speak now. What was the question again for Wing? Guardrails. It was about guardrails. What do you mean by guardrails, Wing?
Oh, so yeah, so Scott had mentioned that the use of the various GPT backend services don't really skew the answers all that much, but that you make use of your prompts to sort of indicate to the chatbot um, where and what you would like the conversation to go. I was just wondering if the majority of that is the majority of how to like sort of like standardize or normalize the response is due to solely to prompts or as the guardrails, serving as guardrails for the conversation, or if there's some other mechanism that you're employing to sort of keep the chat discussion that's occurring along the lines of what you had originally intended.
Okay, thank you. For one, there are no guardrails, or there are guardrails. That's a different thing that I haven't brought up yet. It's another function, so I'll try to be more clear. Let's say we have two different personalities built into this thing, and there'll be a third that I'll mention soon. But one of the personalities has no personality. It's very analytical, and all it does is look at what a user is asking or saying and reduce the words to far less words. That's all it does. And that's the one I'm talking about, that I've given it some guardrails as to how it's going to do that. because I don't want it to remove any special meaning from what the user is attempting to say, but I want it to reduce the word count. So that's one personality. The other personality is the primary one that then takes that modified user question or user content and runs, and it has a longer system guidance programming of its personality, guidelines, whatever, its rules for how it will respond to you based on this cognitive empathy model. Is that more clear? And you can feel free to reply in chat or just out loud. I don't care.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
How does one switch from one personality to another, Scott?
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I wasn't clear there. It's more like you don't have a choice as to, you ask it a question, it answers the question. I'm telling you about the thought processes that go on inside of it. If you imagine it having multiple personalities, and it's like, oh, I received a question. By the way, that's really long. So it's like, if the length of this question is bigger than blah, 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 160 characters in this case, then, hey, worker B over there, personality number 2, shorten that. Okay, now it's short. Now I can really digest it and reply to the user. Does that make sense?
Sure. The idea of an empathy chatbot that did have different personalities, is intriguing to me.
Well, those are more like, when I say that, it's more like if you think of yourself and as a executive, and then you've got worker bees or contractors, and you tell this one contractor his specialty is to shorten communications or translate communications so that you don't have to read a bunch of long stuff, because there is a cost. So anytime that then the conversation, when the smarter AI, the executive, is finally ready to process what the user said, it's cheaper if it's processing less words. Because I'm paying for this, it's like pennies every conversation, but it can stack up, and which is what will bring me to the third or the second worker bee. So we got executive and 2 worker bees. But before I go there, I just want to see what other questions people might have, if they've been talking to it, or if they want me to type something into it, or whatever.
It basically like features and capabilities that people might not know about. I mean, chatbots, I think, have a fundamental problem. They just have a prompt. And so, it's easy to not know cool things that a chatbot can do.
Yeah, now you're inspiring me to think maybe I need to put more buttons. I really prefer a simple interface. So, for example, every single element you see on the screen, I weighed pretty heavily. To me, it adds complication, it adds problems, potential problems. It adds more places the eyeball is going to go, more confusion potentially, blah, blah, blah. But then I've got one of many ADHD friends who was like, it'd be cool if you put some drifting clouds on the screen. And at first I was like, oh God, like really, like more distraction. But then I thought about it and I thought, well, he probably represents the majority, people who want a little bit of glitz, and I don't blame them. And so there you've got the moving clouds. But yeah, regarding buttons, what took me off on that tangent is when you said that, because yes, people do come here and they're like, I don't know what to do. They'll say to it, who are you? What is this? And to me, that either shows they didn't read what was on the screen, or they just, maybe English is a second language, or who knows, you know. But yeah, maybe more buttons with sample prompts, or maybe just one more. And I'm open to suggestions.
Eric, can I
I'd
ask?
like the idea of parameterizing it in some way. I don't have clarity about what parameters I might want to adjust. Oh, was that Kent just talking?
Yeah, I was asking whether I can ask my question yet.
Let's see here. We still have
Huh.
I think some less nerdy people, and yeah, let's hold on to that and just get a little more at the user level before but I was asking you, what do you think it does well? What do you think it, where, like, what, in terms of the core empathy behavior, where do you see a need for work?
Hold on one sec. Okay, can you ask that again? I apologize.
In terms of the core empathy bot behavior, where would you like to see improvement?
Yeah, it's gotten, I'm pretty satisfied with it. There are times when, and I'm still tweaking it, there are times when it offers advice too quickly. And I keep giving it more sample conversations, and that seems to help, but it's still not there. What I think it's gotten a lot better at over the last maybe couple weeks is the opposite, where I'll see people get frustrated because it's doing it's following its rules of not giving advice. And somebody keeps asking the stuff and he keeps saying, oh, wow, do you feel this way about that or whatever? And then they get frustrated and they're like, stop asking me questions. Or what's some of the other, that's a very common one. Stop asking me questions. Another is just give me a solution or something like that. And I think that's funny for various reasons, but yeah, she could get a little better at that, but that's really on me. I'm still tweaking various settings I'm getting close to that. So I'm not, so where could it go? I mean, really, um, uh, processing sound, that's coming. I'm gonna build that in. Processing video so that a person can look at her and maybe, and then, and after that, what will come is her having animated features, and speaking, and then also, like, I've imagined different interfaces like AR, VR goggles, glasses, where I can imagine somebody, having this as an app, and it's so doable right now. An app on like Google Glass or Apple's thing, or Meta's, where the microphones on the glasses hear somebody saying, how come you left your socks on the floor? I'm so pissed off at you. And then the person might be tempted to say something like, shut up, I pay the rent here, or something. Instead, the glasses will have a readout of some suggested empathy, some suggested answers like, oh, wow, it sounds like you're, pretty frustrated with those socks. I'll go pick them up right now, or whatever, but I see that being something that people, sadly, and I'm leery here, but okay, first I'll just say it. I think a lot of people need to learn how to communicate in a more diplomatic, or at least understanding, empathy doesn't have to be diplomatic. It can just be like, wow, yeah, you're feeling that way, huh? but I want, and okay, now here's the leery part. The leery part is, do we want to be even more dependent on technology? So optimally, it would be like training wheels that people take off after they realize, after they learn, that they've use it for a while and they don't become dependent on it. But who knows nowadays?
On a marketing level, what have you learned? How easy is it to get people in to use it? What do people like and not like? Or do people understand? People who are not like big studiers of Marshall Rosenberg, NVC, or other focusing, whatever other empathy-oriented things, do people understand what it is and why they might want to? I mean, can you talk about it from the marketing point of view for a bit?
Marketing? Um,
Like reactions that you're getting from possible users.
yeah, people seem to like it. Nobody really emails me about it. I mean, sometimes in the chats that I review to see if she's doing what she needs to be doing, I'll see stuff like, "Oh, tell Scott this is great," or "I love this," or something. I mean,
Oh,
that's satisfying, but that's not really. I mean, I would love if some billionaire were to hear about this and want to incorporate it into their chat system or something. Like I can imagine, like users on some mainstream chat app, or maybe not mainstream, whatever, some social media platform. I could see them typing something or receiving something from somebody and having an automatic that they could turn off, an automatic translation of anything they said, turn it into empathy. Like I'm going to type something like, as an example here, that big fat hoe stupid person said I was a dick. Oh, great. I wonder if I'm setting off some kind of open AI issue when I use profanity of any kind. I don't think so. In the past, it hasn't. I'm gonna restart it yet again. This is alarming. I think I might know what's happening. Did it hurt your feelings when they called you names? I'm just wondering why that big ugly person keeps eating so much and not washing. Yeah, it's not behaving. Speaking of that, uh, what I'm gonna do, because I don't want this to be happening this way, I'm gonna take a 2-minute break here, and basically, I know what's happening. The Telegram um, stuff is interfering with the web stuff, and I'm gonna shut down the Telegram part. So take a bathroom break or whatever.
oh, okay, so let me see. I had an idea for a question that was kind of halfway in. Oh, right. The question I'd like to start with that begins to go in the nerdy direction is just the kind of very high level architecture, that described in a way that non-programmers might still be able to track, to try to keep non-programmers in the meeting and happy for a little bit longer until we get deep weenie. A good time to answer that question, Scott?
Huh? Okay, what was the question? I was writing some.
Just like when you talk about kind of high level architecture, in such a way that non-programmers will probably still mostly understand. Like, what are the big components? Who talks to who? Um, I personally don't care whether it's running at this point. People have had enough time to play with it, so but whatever.
Okay, I'm really not clear on what your question is.
Why don't you explain how it basically works at a very high level?
Okay. Do you mean like how really it's the same as most LLMs, at least it's source brain. And if you mean, so there's this source brain that I access that understands language really well. And there are a growing number of companies out there that create these source brains, and they're called LLMs, large language models. And what I do is I send that source brain some instructions onto which I teach it a few things. Like what I mentioned, the rule set of cognitive empathy, but I have to keep that pretty small. I can't train it on my entire book yet. I mean, I don't want to say can't, I could do that, but I'm drifting. Okay, so I tell it,
Well, it's
hey,
not just done with prompt engineering. You can, I mean, you might want to explain that there's a lot of stuff you can do just by adding prompts in. This is not just done with prompt engineering. This is more sophisticated than that, right?
yeah, but it's not quite, it's somewhere in the middle, let's say. Yes, I had to write quite a few lines of code to do what it does, but most of it is feeding that external brain via the web, what's called an API call, feeding it, hey, you are a specialist in cognitive empathy. This very specific form, here's what it means. Here's a whole bunch of sample conversations that I want you to mimic, and pointing out different parts of those conversations that are what they mean in terms of cognitive empathy, what kinds of responses I want you to give users. For example, I want you to stay away from giving advice unless you're really pushed.
Now, the staying away from giving advice, was that done basically with prompt engineering, where you basically just tell it avoid giving advice, or was there something more sophisticated you need to do?
Not much. I mean, it's really all that is English. You know, it's a system message I give it that is 9K long, and it part of that, and you have to, you can't, I mean, it doesn't always do as expected. So sometimes you got to say it in different ways, even say it twice, but in two different ways. It's a lot like, here's an interesting factoid about AI, the current state of LLMs. I would have thought, and I think many people would have thought, when these things came out that were, or came to this level of being pretty, whatever you want to call them, how this intelligence level, I think I would have thought, oh, well, they'll be great at math and suck at creativity, right? And they're kind of the opposite. Like, they suck at math and they're really great at creativity, to the point where sometimes they hallucinate. And part of that, and part of the whole mix is that they want to please you. So sometimes they will answer yes to things that are not yes. Okay. So that's one small piece of the whole pie. I do
So it
want
sounds
to,
like oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
So sounds like you found a need to pre-process to summarize. when something was more than 100 and whatever characters long. What was the problem you were trying to solve when you added that into the mix?
Well, the underlying brain, if I just sent it what the user said, and I even before sending it, I would always do things like change out special characters, make sure they weren't trying to inject code in and stuff like that. But okay, but back to the point. If I were to just give them what the user said and the user said something 1,000 characters long, that gets added into the whole conversation. So here's the thing, is the conversation grows because there could be potentially thousands of conversations going on at the same time through Empathy Bot. For her to keep track of any one conversation, what I do is I have a growing storage box, a growing piece of memory. We call it variables, okay? A growing variable that stores the whole conversation. Well, the thing is, it's sending that whole conversation to the brain each time, and that costs money every time. And if you're repeating the first lines of that conversation over and over each time because it's growing, so you're at first you might send 3 lines to the brain to process that, and it comes back with a response. Now you have 4. Then the user says something, and now you have 5. So it grows and grows and grows, but it still has that initial up to 9. But basically, I was just seeking to cut costs, but also a sort of bonus is maybe I can show people how they could be a bit more getting to the point. Maybe they, in a gentle way, they can see, wow, here's how it summarized my book into a paragraph.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kent, do you want to turn on your video? I'm gonna give you a chance to ask your question.
And while he's doing that, I want to say one more thing along the lines, something I left out. It's the second worker bee or contractor or personality, whatever you want to call it. And I just added it yesterday too. What it does, because what I noticed in the sample chats was people asking questions like, what is the stock price of blah, blah, blah right now? What is the distance from my location to this other location? What is blah, blah, blah? Okay, so stuff that she can answer, but it costs me money, and it's not the point of Empathy Bot. So the point of Empathy Bot is not to give you information. It's to be your personal coach. Do you go to your personal coach or psychiatrist and ask them those kind of questions? No. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. I mean, when it comes down to it, costs me money. So I built in a third personality that so it does the compression. Then it sends that answer onto this other personality that says, hey, and this one, it required more thought in the system message I gave it to determine, is it asking an empathy related question or a personal problems related question, relationship, job, any family, all that. If it's not that, and you found that it's like a businessy kind of question or something that can be measured, blah, 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 then what you're going to do is add a little tick to that ID for that person, which I'm not going to tell you how I track the person without, it doesn't have your personal information, but I don't want people to start getting around this and just messing with taking, liberties with her. I mean, she'll refute, but basically when you get enough ticks next to your ID in the database, it then sends you a message saying you're blacklisted, and then it doesn't let you ask her any more questions. And there's some in-betweens. You get warnings that, hey, that's not really my specialty. Can you ask me something more having to do with personal problems?
Great. Kent, you want to ask your question again, please? Okay, Kent may have been away from his desk. Okay, Justin, do you want to be verbal and perhaps video?
Yeah, I'm back.
Hello.
Is that a question to me? I'm sorry, I'm working at the same time.
Oh, okay, great.
Thanks.
Add spotlight. Okay,
Uh,
Kent, ask away.
I'm curious where the empathy resides and sort of what knobs you're turning, whether you're just turning up a dial that says, more empathy, less humor, or something like that. Are you doing conversation fragments? Are you like, what's the data that is in the language model and what data are you providing? I think in part because when I think about empathy, I think about attention to conversation, and the conversation itself has some implications from what things they're saying. I think if somebody told me they were rewording the things that I was saying before they tried to analyze what they were or something, I'd be a little nervous. So I'm curious whether you think that something is lost in that process and that it's just a cost issue, you do it, or whether you think it works just as well that way.
Yeah, I love those questions, Kent. So first off, the dials that you mentioned. There are a couple dials to when every time I send a query to the brain, I can determine very few things really, and including something called temperature. That, if you've played with the API of any of these models, they all have, or most of them use something called temperature. That's basically creativity versus logic. And if you push it too far into creativity, it's going to be kind of insane and not really follow instructions very well. If you push it too far into logic, it's going to be kind of boring and repetitive. So there's that dial, but really what influences it more is, yes, you hit on it. You said sentence fragments or conversation fragments, and that's where I actually give it full conversations, or at least 5 lines or so, 5 to 6 lines of conversations. Like, here's how I want conversations to go, and it'll be like user and then some words and then empath and here's some words. And I just shortened it to E, and it knows because I've told it as a key at some point, because the less words I give it, the less expensive basically toward its memory, its sanity, etc. Because if you fill up its memory too much, it goes a little insane. Or not really insane, that's not a good word. It starts to forget some of what you've told it. So there's a balance there. So yeah, and then say with humor, for example, no, you can't just tell it be more humorous. It's more like, here's some examples. And even here's how we do a rhyme is at the end of any given line, you might rhyme with, but you define rhyme for it. And then you say, even though they know what rhyme means, the brain does. I found it's very helpful to tell it what you mean by that and what kind of rhyming structure you want, where it might be like every other line at the end is going to be a rhyming word, etc. With humor, yeah, a bit of instruction onto what kinds of humor I want from it, as well as, and you can't tell it probabilities because it's so sucky at math still. I found I can't tell it 50% of the time be funny or something like that. No, it just ignores that. But if I tell it, if the user seems to be saying things that do not really make sense and might be considered humorous, and this and that, or this or that, a lot of parentheses, like when you're coding, then the user is probably in a humorous mood. You can match that mood or that tone. And here are some ways we might match a tone of being lighthearted or humorous or playful.
And are you saying these things at the level of code? Do you just write words like the words you just said, or is there like a programmatic interface that allows you to control that? I'm just curious, like what the quality of your conversation with the system and programming this is.
Well, that temperature variable, that sounds like something that's directly accessible via the API?
Yes, and so here's where we'll get a little more nerdy even.
Yeah, now I think we can be fully nerd centric as far as I'm concerned.
So I use Visual Studio Code, and I'm trying to like, oh well, that'll work. So there's a few files. I want to. There's like a header that. I mean, there's way more files than this. This isn't the full directory, but these are the ones I've been working on lately. And so the main app is here, and the main dependencies are Flask. These I underscore ones are ones that are basically other files, just custom functions I wrote. So get the key so I can access that brain, that API. And and somebody had asked a question in chat that I'll sidetrack real quick. Because you could see here where I've got the models I've used since inception. And you might notice that Anthropic Cloud 3 Opus is one of the models. And I did briefly use some other ones that weren't performant enough in terms of being intelligent enough. And even Claude 3 Opus, latest version, is not really as good at processing my system message. And it could be because I need to rewrite the system message. And by system message, I mean all that English I was talking about.
But it's just the message is basically prompt engineering where you're sending along with the
Yeah,
material from the end user English language instructions.
yeah. And see here, we've got some
You're
temperature.
saying if you tuned the hell out of it for Anthropic products, it might be as good as OpenAI products?
Right.
Okay.
I think it would. But it right now it kind of doesn't really, and I'm working on a system message for Anthropic's AIs. And I'd like to also include others, like Mixtral has a pretty good one. It's not at this level, but Llama 3 is open source. Believe it or not, for those who don't know, Meta, which Facebook, which I always considered pretty evil, has come out with a free open source model that is about as good as GPT-4, maybe a couple versions back. Not this latest. So that's something free that people can install on their own server or on their own home computer and query it, and it's pretty awesome. So that
How much money would you save on well, I guess hold on. If your user base is really small, and you just had your LLM on some gamer machine at home, then you could run the open source version and it would cost you nothing, right? Once you paid for the machine.
correct. Yeah, I mean,
running the open source LLM versus like in the cloud versus running on ChatGPT API. Do you have a sense about the difference in cost?
so in the cloud, no, not really, because that's going to depend if you're talking about like putting it up on AWS or Google or Azure or something like that. And I don't know.
You haven't explored that? No problem.
No, I haven't explored that. I've got a server, my own, that just sits out there and I pay monthly for it. And I think it's like $80 a month. And that's what Empathy Bot runs on and the database behind it.
Nice.
But it reaches out to OpenAI's API or Anthropic's. If OpenAI's API goes down, then it swaps over to using, and it does go down, from many times a day, but usually it's just for seconds. So here, the temperatures are a bit different for OpenAI versus Anthropic, but really the way you query the interface is almost identical. I had to learn just a few changes. And so
Wow,
here's
you're
part of
really failing over from one LLM to another. Why am I so tickled by that? That's that's very cool.
yeah, I was tickled by the idea, like, whoa, that's kind of fun. And makes
It
it
could
more,
fail over in the middle of a conversation, and you're going to pass on enough information that I probably won't know.
yeah, that part I tested out. It's just I would know because I would notice that it wasn't quite as smart, but I shouldn't call it that. It's more like I said, the system prompt was not written for Anthropic's.
Oh,
And
okay. So you would just know that it was Anthropic, but you wouldn't. I hear you.
yeah.
Before we put someone else in the on the screen, Kent, you got more questions right now, or you can come back?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm still curious about like how much we're deriving from these individual theories of prediction and stuff. Like I mean, some of it is that in the old theory of AI, we used to want to understand something about people. In the new theory of AI, we just throw it in and let it do a lot of um, math. And I'm not sure exactly what you learn, but like, for example, linguist H.P. Grice did some study of conversational implicature where he said that people don't say things for the truth value of what they say it for its implication. And so if you have a conversation like, how's your brother the accountant? And then the response is, well, he's not in jail. And the you're not saying he's not in jail in order to say something about the truth value. You're sort of evoking the concept that he might soon be in jail or something. Like, and empathy isn't quite the same as that, but it's communicated along these kind of subtle lines that sort of follow the conversation but are not the conversation. And so I'm curious where the empathy resides in some sense. Like, is it something that the LLM is kind of managing and we're just trusting that it'll behave in some sort of human-like way? Or like, is it super dependent on the specific examples that you input um, to have to have predicted scenarios? And how many scenarios do you have to make it do something useful? Um,
Yeah,
I
so
don't know if these questions make any sense or could be answered precisely, but those are kinds of questions I'm having anyway.
yeah. No, I love this. And then, well, because that's a little bit hard, but I can do it. So first off, I mean, there's two entities we're talking about here, I'm assuming. One is the greater LLM brain that I'm talking about, and one is my little thing that's sort of like a layer on above that brain, sort of translating for the brain and telling it, hey, here's this part of your knowledge that I want, no other parts. And by the way, with this part of your knowledge, I want you to supplement that with this 9K of information. Okay. Now, for those who don't, you probably already know this, but I just want to make sure I'm covering a wider range of knowledge. LLMs are pattern recognition systems. So all they're doing is, and so one way that people describe LLMs is, and I'm going to pull up this file so I can read a tiny bit from it. Don't worry, I'm not going to, it's just a file I've created that I keep called LLM costs, and I keep updating it. And, but next to some of these, like Mistral 7B, that means 7 billion. Llama 3 8B or 70B 70 billion. So what these are not exactly equivalent to, but well, not exactly equal to, but equivalent to, if you just think, well, it's trained on 70 billion conversations, let's say. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is when an LLM is reliant on a lot of memory, so it can be fast, so it can store and access billions of conversations. And so it's kind of like some people that are the more cynical about AI might say, but they're right, is that it's just a sentence finishing machine. Now it's more, they not it, they tend to be more than that, but it is a simplistic and correct way to put it, that they just have experienced so many conversations that they can understand where you're coming from. And remember how earlier I was talking about how somebody might say something to me in a chat and I can't understand what they're saying, or I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time trying to figure it out. I will paste it in, and an LLM will oftentimes parse that out in like half a second and tell me what they were really trying to say. And 99% of the time, it's true, it's correct. Now, I don't mean with the empathy, because I get your point there. That's moving a bit more into the land of the unknown or more esoteric, and yet not, because again, it's trained on real world conversations. So colloquialisms, if you say things like, yeah, let's kill two birds with one stone, it's, let's try that right now. If I have two people I want to hang out with, but only have time for one, how do I kill two birds with one stone? Yes, tell me some ways I can do this. So you have to push it to get out of feelings mode. See, and I love that this is what I want it to do. It frustrates some people, but hey, it's what your psychologist is for, to frustrate the shit out of you. Awesome. How about organizing a casual get together where both can join? I kind of figured it would say that, blah, blah. So yeah, and that's an potentially easy colloquialism. But I don't know. Did I answer your question?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm not sure what would answer the question, so that's fine.
Anybody else got anything for right now? I'll look in chat.
I think an earlier, Justin, had some questions. Justin, do you mind, turning on your video and asking away?
Yeah, I was just asking about how you handle the actual chat, and I saw in your code you're using chat completions, and then even you have a sorry, I got someone back. Then you have a basically compress it using another chat completion. So I thought that was cool. I think I saw what I was wondering, just looking at your code.
Well, why don't you though, talk about it a little bit, because the rest of us might not be as fast at reading the code. So why don't you tell us what you think you saw, and we can confirm it with Scott here.
Yeah, so I was wondering because you were saying the length of the context window, but in addition, you were mentioning the cost, which makes sense too. But so there are techniques out there to compress the information within text. I think I linked an article what was called sparse. It's kind of crazy, but sparse priming representations. There's all kinds of fancy ways you can do that, and there's libraries to do it. But I thought it was cool. I saw you had a chat. You said, "Hey, remove all the stuff, correct the spelling, and do some other things," and then that kind of like basically put everything down. So that way, in your running context, everything you have, it seems like it's reducing it that way. Um, yeah, and then an interesting thing is you were mentioning that I believe one of the concerns you have talking about your trying to put your book into it is that you have to put that into the chat completion. Is that one of the concerns right now?
Yeah, there's
The prompt.
no way I would even try to do that. Even with the 128K window, right? No, so that's the next stage, is learning how to to do vector. I've already added a plugin. The database, the underlying database is a Postgres, and there's a plugin for Postgres so I could add vector fields. And so I've already planned out how I'm going to vectorize content, because I really want another way, because I do like money, is to be able to take this chatbot and reskin it for any industry or domain. So give it to an attorney, let's say, but train it on every legal document ever, whatever, and that would involve vectorizing the data. That's where you basically take sentiments, like you take a whole, like let's say a whole conversation, and you take the sentiments out of that conversation, or even it doesn't have to be a conversation. It could be, yeah, I don't want to go super deep into the technical because partially I don't fully understand it yet, but I do understand vectorizing. It's sort of like the difference between, it makes it a lot faster to find information. So you can have an entire document store or a book, and then you could query the AI, and it will just have almost instant recall, depending on your hardware, etc. But fast recall of anything that's contained in that, and you can use it as training. You could call it training. You could call it instant recall. You could call it a lot of things. But yeah, that's on my plate, and that'll be a big evolution, I think, because then I won't be giving it just 10 conversations and tweaking those all the time and fretting about adding more and how the cost of that in terms of memory. I mean, really, I think it's got like 16 conversations in the system prompt right now, in addition to lots of other instructions. Yeah, I would love to have it know, because my book, at the end of every chapter, are sample conversations and exercises and stuff. And if it knew that entire book, oh my God, I think it would be a hell of a lot better at what it does.
I got. I'm
Would
going
one
to
of you?
shamelessly plug my meetup coming up in a couple of weeks.
Oh, yes.
I'm
I'm
talking
sorry.
about
I should
using
be.
Open AI Assistance, which has built-in vector stores. It's not as much flexibility as you get with doing something like a true Postgres data store, but using an Open AI Assistant, you don't even got to do it through the API. If you go to Assistance, and then you can just take a PDF or other things and make a fancy prompt, and it'll go through and do some stuff there.
Yeah, I've used that. I need to do it. I want to do it programmatically, of course. And that's pretty cool. I've done that for like, here's my resume, and I'm going to paste in a job description. I made one of the GPTs that would do that,
Yeah.
and I want you to tell me the pros and cons of how I can, and write me a letter to the hiring manager and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I've used that. And I wonder if you've noticed this. So between GPT-4 Turbo and then this latest GPT-4o, if you've talked to it much, just on the website, what I've noticed, it seems like it's doing a checking on itself, like agent systems are doing. Like, and that's not something it ever seemed like. GPT-4 always seemed like just one shot, like most of them are. They just answer your question very confidently. But this one, it's like it double checks itself. It'll answer the question, but it'll say, but let me make sure of that. And I'm double checking these websites or this or that. And yeah, it turns out that that's right or something. And I'm like, whoa, maybe they are building, and that might render agent systems obsolete. But this is very specialized information. I don't want to turn off everybody by going super far into that.
Yeah, and what Eric is showing right now. So yeah, the GPTs I've been playing with too, but I'm gonna walk through programmatically how to. I got like a small workflow of, hey, I have a bunch of files. I want to create a new assistant. I want to add those files into the context. I want to create a vector store from those. I have a system prompt, and then I'm going to spin everything up and create it. And then you can go into the assistant playground or use the API to interact with it. But one of the negative parts is, though, it works on threads. You don't have the chat completion control that you have over here that you're working with. So and then it wouldn't interoperate probably as easily with Anthropic and some other things. So there's pros and cons to every situation.
Wow, yeah, that's cool.
Right.
Yeah,
So
but I mean,
you might want to, I put the URL
He did.
into the chat so people can jump in. I can sign up. And next week, um, I will, or someone else will, just kind of go through and show the different features of GitHub Copilot. Those are two that are coming up. And but what do you would one of or both of you guys talk about when we talk about vectorizing in this sense? Does either one of you feel comfortable talking about what this is all about?
Some
yeah,
of it, but
as
feel free.
I was gonna say, it's creating a giant multi-dimensional space where relationships of things, not just text, can be determined. And there are some fancy algorithms to do that. Going into the math, I do not know, but what you get back is depending upon the number of points in your vector, which is just an array, and it
Right.
stores that in the database. And there are a lot, it's a long list of numbers that, as you said, Scott, relates sentiment, meaning. Like, there's again algorithms that encode this information and basically put it in a point in a giant multi-dimensional space, and then when you query it, it picks it from that space and says, hey, this thing is that close to it. And there's a lot of magic there. I know how to use the tools. The actual vectorization of everything is still pretty crazy to me. Like, OpenAI has like some vectorization API calls that you can do, and then there's other free models and things that you can use out there too. There's vector databases as a service like Pinecone. There is the PG Vector plugin to Postgres. Um, and then the thing I don't like about the assistance right now is it is a black box on how Open API vectorizes things, and I can't tweak it, but it meets my needs. I don't think it would meet like a true product need. I don't know if that was too nerdy, too high.
Well, that's good. I mean, like back when I mean, with something like support vector machines, vectorizing of a Wikipedia article really might just mean like you say, forgetting about the 20 most common words in the English language, for the next 4,000 most common words in the English language, we're just going to put assign a cell. And so if the word uh, Linux shows up 5 times in the article, you'll put a 5 in that position. It was a like very basic notion of what vectorization meant. And support vector machine just made, kind of a multi-dimensional kind of hypercube, and it would, distinguish the interesting from the uninteresting items. I don't know whether that kind of vectorization is what they're talking about here. And like, I mean, what do we know about what a vector database or what this plugin to PostgreSQL does? Can either of you talk about that?
Far as I know, it just adds a field type. So if you think of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, because I haven't utilized it. I've already redesigned my database by just adding that, but I haven't started using any tools to vectorize yet. But back to, okay, so it adds a field type where a field type would be like long integer or string or even could hold an image. And then there's this new field type for Postgres, at least, that is a vector field type. That's the way I understand it's supposed to work. And as far as work, yeah, I mean, Justin described it perfectly as to how I understand it works. And yeah, we use tools. We don't do any vectorizing. I wouldn't even know how to do that. It's more like, and I'm not even sure if it's like PyTorch you can use some parts of PyTorch to do vectorizing. There's something called BERT. I've got it in my notes. I've got this big plan I made where I know when I build that little program that will, because I want to build a program that does the vectorizing so that then eventually, like I mentioned, I would have a bot that anybody can point at their document store, blah, blah, blah. And I'll admit that as I'm doing other more important things first, but getting to that I do have a hope that before I get to that, it'll be obsolete. It'll be, and that's something I think about a lot of this AI related stuff is that they're moving so fast. And one example is how 4.0, this latest version that you might call something like 4.5, is suspiciously quite a bit like an agent system, like a multi-personality system, just that they tweak their interface some to have a couple instances of, and this would be one way they could do it, but I have no idea. A couple instances of OpenAI, instead of you're just talking to one, you're talking to twins, and the twins confer with each other before giving you an answer. And to me, that is a really smart thing. It's what a lot of open source, just random people in their basements have been building. There's a whole bunch of agent systems out there where they spawn multiple entities to take care of tasks. And that way you can have double checking for accuracy and in my case, cost, fixing things up, yeah, blah, blah, blah.
Justin, if you're talking to us, you're muted.
Sorry, I posted a couple things in chat real quick. Like, I've played with the OpenAI to do embeddings, and then you can put those into your vector database, Scott. But like, yeah, I've never like tried to, like you were saying, Eric's like count the number of things and make a fancy vector. That's nothing I've ever done. But like the one that I used was the text embedding ADA002, which I worked on a client project and we put things into Pinecone doing this, but it takes whatever you give it and it turns it into a array of 1,535 digits. I don't know. Right?
You can give it an entire document. You can give it what?
You can give it images, like it's multimodal.
Wow.
Somehow the magic of this knows how to do it, right? But it turns it into this again. Instead of a 3D space, it is a 1,535 dimension space. And who knows how that magic works? And that's how the vector database does. And then when you query something, you're like, I am looking for something positive. Somehow that sentence gets encoded in that same embedding ADA 002, and it points it in that same giant space. And my movie, my image, my whatever is all in that space as a vector. And it knows somehow that those things are, however close it is. And then it returns a number saying like it's 0.8, 0.9, point something,
Yeah, like the weight, the relationship, like how strong is the relationship? And so it's like when you said 15,000 or what, we'll just pick a number, right? And it could be 70 billion relationships that are out there. Well, those are all somewhat simultaneous, and so it's like where a normal human mind can only conceive of a certain number of relationships at any given moment, these things can conceive of gazillions of relationships at any given moment and real quickly find the most attractive or close matching answer to your question or whatever. Justin, would you say that's accurate to what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And I just posted in chat. I have to get back to work. Like I can't play all day.
Dare you?
But I look forward. Scott, reach out if you want at some point. We could talk about like the setting things up. It looks like you're partway through a journey that I've done, and you've done things that I haven't considered yet. So would love to connect at some point.
Sweet. Yeah, I pulled up your meetup, so I'll message you. Well, it sucks through there. Can I just give you my
Actually, if people could, let me see. I want to create a WhatsApp group for this sort of thing so that people can um can connect here. That I think that would be a nice way to do it. What do people think?
Sure.
Hey, we have not had very much female presence. I don't know who all the females are. But there's at least one female looking face. Would anyone female like to either ask a question verbally or textually? Hey, Justin, thanks so much. Let me see if okay, while we're waiting for a female person to ask a question or make a suggestion or what have you, I'm going to ask wait, I typed one in case I would forget it. Oh, to what degree do you understand what fine tuning is and how would it fit into your current or future architecture?
Yeah, so fine tuning, there are two different ways that I see it can be done right now. One is you go to OpenAI, you go to their website, you sign up for a high level, expensive account. It might be available to us measly $20 a month people. But then with that, there's a special process you also pay extra for, depending on how much data. And it is a process close to as complicated as the vectorization of a whole bunch of data, where you utilize AI to help you put a bunch of raw data as a layer on top of their brain, so then it's basically like you pay them to take a copy of their 100 billion parameter model, their huge model. They make a copy of it that's just yours to play with. And then because it's just yours, you can fine tune it to be biased, to have more information, less information, whatever you want to do to it. So that's kind of the high level of what fine tuning is. The other way to do it is all of that, but like on your own server with an open free model like Llama 3, for example.
What kinds of things you have not had to get the behavior you have now, you have not had to go to the level of fine tuning, is that right?
Right. Yeah, I've used a sort of shortcut, literally shortcut, because instead of, like, if I was to fine tune one, I would want to share with it thousands of conversations, maybe tens of thousands, maybe, the more the better. And in my case here, I think there's like 12 conversations, as well as, about 10, 15 more just rules. Like, hey, you never, you don't try to solve people's problems for them. That's for them to do. You just want to support them in solving their own problems. Or you never use the term mate in terms of, did that make you feel a certain way? Blah, 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 blah. So various rules. Yeah, so instead of 9K that you're feeding it every single conversation, or at the start of every single conversation, you would be just modifying the brain itself so that you wouldn't ever have to tell it any of those rules. It just knows those rules as part of its being.
And the interface for fine tuning is like giving it a series of basically prompts and answers. And then like if someone were to say this, say something like this kind of thing, is that, I mean,
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's all these dictionary JSON looking structures where it's like,
given that you have a book, being able to take like the conversations you have at the end of the chapters and being able to literally say, well, if someone literally said this, then literally say that, I guess you could use that as data for that purpose.
Yeah, and it will recognize patterns. So it's not like I have to, I mean, there's a certain point where they gain, because they've got that underlying understanding of, billions of conversations out there that, it might just require 1,000 conversations where it starts to really get the hang of a certain style of talking, which I don't know if you've heard about people doing that. I'm not sure how often they're using fine tuning or vectorization, which is called RAG, retrieval augmented generation. But where they have, there's an AI out there I follow, or a person who uses AI to make a D&D Dungeons and Dragons adventure, and he uses AI to make the story and also to make people's voices. So he's got, I don't know if you've heard of Joe Rogan or Samuel L. Jackson or Donald Trump. He's got all these people, their voices, and them conversing with each other in this. They're all sitting around a table, supposedly. You hear them, and you hear them talking to each other. And it's even pulling in a little bit of their personality, but mainly their voices. And they're being creative and thoughtful and bouncing ideas off each other, and it's pretty amazing. And I'll post in the chat, in case anybody's interested, a link to that guy's YouTube, so you can see that, and you could maybe watch one of these.
And the elements of this that you consider to be the most challenging parts or stuff you wouldn't offhand know how to do would be what?
Voice and images, which I use various. So I've never built, to me, the building part, I've only done text stuff, but I've never built any voice image stuff. I've used various tools out there to generate images for, like, because I host a lot of events. If every time I host a barbecue, let's say, I'll go out there to certain ones that are my favorites and have them generate images, and then I'll modify those images in Photoshop or whatever.
Nice. Okay.
I pasted that in chat.
We had some questions from Wing. Wing, any chance you would wait, do we still have Wing? I think we've lost Wing.
Hey,
Well,
I need to step away for like 2 minutes.
no problem. We got Justin. We don't have Wing. Anybody who's still, oh, Jim. Jim, any chance that you would like to turn on your video or ask your question verbally? More interesting once Scott gets back. Sean, Henry, and I'm not able to pronounce Richetti. Any of you folks want to ask any questions when Scott gets back? Let's see, do we have anything in the chat? Lan, have to drop for work, thank you. Okay, well, I guess it's too late to tell you to come back in the future. Okay, so I'm just gonna have Scott work his way. Okay, so Scott, I'm gonna ask you to work your way through the various questions that are in the chat that you've not already gotten to, like ones from Wing. Um, and then we can wrap. How does that sound?
Sure.
Actually, here's one for you. What would you have done differently if you were um starting from scratch, but you had more wisdom? Like what are the main like lessons learned that you would be, wow, I wish I had known X, Y, and Z.
Oh yeah, I love that question. So version 1 of this thing was in 2018, and I was a beginner with Python at that time. I've been programming in other languages, and ASP was my specialty. So I didn't even know about all the libraries that Python provided even then for like NLTK or PyTorch or TensorFlow. I didn't know those existed. I didn't even know what AI was really, except for what you see in science fiction. So but I'd been doing databases for many years and all kinds of programming. So I decided to make a pattern recognition system that would be highly dependent on lots of data. But I started with just manually adding, having a table in the database that was, let's say, feelings. So every feeling that I could think of and put in there. And this was a relational database. So I would have another table called needs. So needs underlie feelings. And this is before I developed my system that's based on NVC. So this was very NVC. And there were a lot of other tables that did different things, but basically when somebody types something in, the first thing that would be searched is for the entire sentence. And rarely, if ever, did it find the entire sentence. But I would do things at first like remove punctuation and other stuff to sort of normalize sentences that people might ask it. Then I would look in the database in a table called sentences or phrases, and it wouldn't find. Then I would start chunking pieces of that sentence into all the different combinations that were consecutive words next to each other and look in the phrases table for those. And if it found one, it would be linked to feelings and or needs. Well, feelings would, another thing I was able to do manually was link many needs to any given feeling. So there was an in-between table that handled that, blah, blah, blah. So basically what it did is it sort of mechanistically went through all these stages, first looking at the entire sentence, then looking at chunks of that sentence, and slowly building for that conversation, or it wasn't even a conversation, it was just one phrase that it was interpreting and responding to. So for that session, that person, it was building a feeling slash needs weight. And so in the beginning, it might have like 5 different feelings it's guessing at and 2 different needs or 12 different needs. But then as it went through and looked at the sentences in different perspectives or from different perspectives, it would give more and less weight to different feelings and needs till eventually it would narrow it down to whatever, like 2 different feelings that they might be having in that situation. Then it would show the user its answer. And if you were signed in, then you would see a different answer. The answer you saw if you're signed in would be drop-down boxes for every part of that that response from the AI. And so you could then, if you felt like, nah, I didn't really nail my need there, and you could click on that, and then a whole list of potential needs where it was weighted based on what it had been guessing so far before it gave you that one that it zeroed in on. It would have all those at the top, this is sort of suggested needs. And you could say, yeah, that was my need. And that feeling, nah, it was more like this, or that tense, like, so it would get tenses wrong sometimes when it responded. So you could adjust, and then it would take whatever the user gives it back and put it back into the database and give weights and change the weighting of how feelings and needs relate to different words or different phrases. And so it got smarter the more that people played with it, because the database got bigger, and it got more refined as to the way it weighted how feelings and needs related to different other words and phrases.
This is all without LLMs at all.
Right. So what I wish from your question is that I'd have known, because what I ended up moving to, I discovered as I got better with Python, and then I realized, oh my God, here's NLTK, where I just used one small part of NLTK, which was sentiment recognition. So I could feed it everything that the user said, and then ask it what feeling it got from that, and then compare, before responding to the user, compare what was the sentiment my database gave up and what was the sentiment given by NLTK. And then I would give a more refined answer to the user. And then after that, I ditched all of that because I found OpenAI.
Right. Okay, so we have Wing Wang. Wing was it Wing. He made a few comments here. How well would Empath work with a smaller model like LAMA2-ZB? Is that Z? I guess that's a Z8. What was ZB? That's 7B. Or LLAMA3-7B.
Not as good as it would on something like OpenAI. I mean, sure, you could. I mean, Llama, they're super well optimized, and for being smaller models, they rock. Like a 7B version of OpenAI would probably get trounced by Llama 7B. But really, I don't have time to create all these experiments. I would love to, but I got to pay rent. So, I mean, it'd be a fun experiment, I'm sure.
Running locally versus running against OpenAI, I think a big concern would be the impact on response quality, i.e. most game desktops can only run smaller models due to the limited VRAM, i.e. 7B models. I would imagine the loss of context, real-world knowledge would impact the quality of the empath. That sounds plausible to you. It seems you're shaking you seem to be agreeing.
Yeah, run anything locally. And now I think things are moving super fast. Like NVIDIA's next set of cards coming out are gonna be way more powerful, especially for AI, than the current cards. So, I'm hopeful that, and plus, models are getting more efficient. But yeah, he's correct. I agree.
Hey Jim, do you want to ask or say anything before we shut down? Anyone else?
Sorry, it's way
No
too
problem.
busy here. I can't unmute or go on camera at the moment. Sorry.
No, you don't need camera. Do you want to ask a question before we shut down?
Type something if you want.
No, I'm good. He already replied to my question. Thanks, Scott.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay. Well, Scott, we would love to have you back in like about 6 months or something. I'm sure you will have wonderful new experiences to share with us. And I put a new WhatsApp group into the chat. So Scott, I'd love it if you would join, and anyone else who's currently here. By the way, what's the right way